What's up everybody, this is Master Ian Gamer. Overwatch just released its first non-cosmetic content update in more than 8 months, and it's a new Deathmatch map. Now, admittedly, I personally am actually a big fan of Deathmatch. I play it quite a bit, so I'm quite excited that Malevento was finally released. But I understand that I'm actually in the minority in that regard, and that most people couldn't care less about Deathmatch, which means it's kind of insulting when over the past year we've only gotten 2 real gameplay-focused, non-cosmetic content updates, and both of them have been Deathmatch maps. So why is it that Blizzard has decided to focus so heavily on Deathmatch specifically at this point in Overwatch's life? Well, believe it or not, Blizzard actually has some pretty good reasons to be focusing just on Deathmatch at this point, and as you might have guessed, it does in fact have quite a bit to do with Overwatch 2. Real quick before I jump into today's video though, I would like to remind you to subscribe and hit up that bell icon to never miss out on any future Overwatch and Overwatch 2 news and content. But now, let's talk about why Blizzard has been so obsessed with Deathmatch recently. So when it comes to the reasons why Blizzard has been focusing so much on Deathmatch as opposed to the other standard quick play and competitive type game modes like Escort, Control Point, and Hybrid, there actually appears to be a number of reasons why Blizzard is focusing on Deathmatch maps specifically. The first of these reasons was actually laid out very specifically by former Overwatch game director Jeff Kaplan back when Kanazaka, the previous Overwatch Deathmatch map, was released to PTR back in December of 2020. In this dev update, Jeff actually specified that Kanazaka originated as sort of a test project for one of Overwatch's new map developers, and after having completed this sort of test project, the Overwatch development team felt like the map was good enough to actually push to live servers and release as an official map in the game. Now, while I do think Jeff was being honest in stating this about Kanazaka, I'm willing to bet there was also a bit more to the situation than what he simply said regarding it being a test development project, specifically because when you actually look at the map itself and see how it ties into Hanzo and Genji's backstories, and the heavy-duty teaser for the Kanazaka Fox Girl, who at this point we basically know for sure is going to be a new hero in Overwatch 2, yeah, I'm willing to bet that it wasn't just a case of, hey, this map happens to be cool, let's just release it. I think there was much more intent behind planning out and releasing this map than Blizzard necessarily stated at the time, but that's neither here nor there. Basically, Jeff's explanation of why Kanazaka exists is that it was a test project in development that they felt was good enough to make official and release publicly, and while that same statement hasn't specifically been made in regards to Malevento, it's possible that there's a similar situation going on behind the scenes for this new map as well. But even if that does end up being the case, that doesn't very well explain why Blizzard focuses on Deathmatch specifically in terms of getting new Overwatch map developers up to speed with producing Overwatch maps, but the most likely reason that they focus on Deathmatch in this regard is because designing a Deathmatch map is just easier. Basically, in every aspect of map design, Deathmatch maps are just easier to create than typical game mode maps, like I mentioned earlier. They're physically smaller, which simply means there's less production work that has to go into them in order to make them playable. They also lack any sort of definitive objectives, such as payloads or control points, as it basically just comes down to players having enough room to stand around and shoot other players, which then also has the added benefit of making these maps significantly easier to balance. Not only because they don't have any physical on-map objectives, but also because balance in Deathmatch just isn't as important as balance in Assault or Control Point or Hybrid or Escort maps. These other primary game mode maps need to be able to be viable in a competitive setting, which means that they have to be evenly balanced and present a fair chance for either team while playing on the level. Deathmatch maps are more or less just hardcore casual. Sure, there are a lot of people who take Deathmatch very seriously, and there even are competitive Deathmatch seasons, but overall, Deathmatch just doesn't really matter in that regard, which is why it's so easy to develop these new maps for Deathmatch. Balance is less important, the map is physically smaller, and all around it's just a simpler project to make a Deathmatch map than a map for just about any other game mode. But even so, Deathmatch Maps being easy to make and thus evidently good first-time projects for new Overwatch map developers doesn't fully encapsulate the reason Blizzard hasn't given us a new standard game mode map in the past 2 years at this point, and instead has only focused on Deathmatch, because more than anything, I think the real reason behind all this is in fact Overwatch 2, and specifically the fact that maps are going to be much different in Overwatch 2 than they are in Overwatch 1. If for no other reason, the change from 6v6 to 5v5, where each team is now only going to have one tank instead of two, means that the maps you're playing on themselves are going to need to have more cover for players to hide behind in order to not just die immediately to snipers. This is presumably the reason why, according to Jeff Kaplan in an interview from back in February of 2021, he stated that there's going to be a full brand new roster of maps with the release of Overwatch 2. At the time of him stating this, we didn't know yet that Overwatch would be switching to the 5v5 format, so our thoughts at the time was that, oh, this just means there's going to be a ton of new content in the form of new maps, but hey, the maps themselves are probably going to play out pretty similarly to the ones we've already been playing on in Overwatch 1. However, with the announcement of 5v5 and a more in-depth look at many of the Overwatch 2 maps we're going to end up getting in the sequel, it also seems fairly evident that the reason they're making an entire roster's worth of new maps is because these new maps are going to be balanced differently from the ones we're playing on currently in Overwatch 1. Now, on a side note, this does also raise the question of whether the existing Overwatch 1 maps will in fact be playable at all in Overwatch 2, and from what the developers have said themselves, it sounds like they're aiming to make the old maps still viable in the sequel, with a remark from Jeff Kaplan in the same interview I mentioned earlier, even stating that they're looking for ways to introduce 2CP, which is the assault game mode that's going to be removed from the standard rotation in Overwatch 2, into either the arcade or at the very least custom games. So presumably the existing Overwatch 1 maps will still exist come Overwatch 2, but they might not exist in the same competitive and quick play rotation. They might only be playable as sort of side, lesser balanced maps given the change from 6v6 to 5v5, with the new 5v5 specific maps such as New York, Rome, and Toronto all having been developed and balanced specifically to work in Overwatch 2 with 5v5. Now, getting back to Deathmatch, the reason this is relevant is because Deathmatch Maps can conveniently sort of circumvent this issue. If you think about Blizzard developing a new map for Overwatch 1 in the 6v6 format at this point in time, it would almost be a waste of effort for them, because they would have to balance it to fit the 6v6 format, only to then either ditch it entirely come Overwatch 2, or put in a whole ton of extra effort to convert it from the 6v6 format to 5v5. With Deathmatch, however, given that it's a free-for-all gameplay format where you don't have teams and 6v6 relative to 5v5 doesn't even matter, presumably the Deathmatch maps we have currently in Overwatch 1 can be immediately ported straight into Overwatch 2, without having to make any changes whatsoever to the maps themselves. It's specifically the fact that Deathmatch maps are going to presumably be so portable from Overwatch 1 to Overwatch 2 that Blizzard has focused on giving us Deathmatch maps specifically at this point in time. It's content which will work in both the original game and the sequel, so why not release it now in the original game just so we have a little something extra to play with while waiting for the release of Overwatch 2. Now, admittedly, that doesn't necessarily fix the issue for many players who are just not at all interested in Deathmatch, and I think it's totally fair for someone to still be frustrated with the fact that we keep getting new maps which only appeal to a smaller portion of the player base. But if I'm being honest, I think it's still better than nothing. The alternative, it would seem, for the time being, is that we simply get no new maps whatsoever, because I really doubt Blizzard would focus on giving us a map in Overwatch 1 at this point in time, only to then have to rework it within the next year in order to have it work in Overwatch 2. So whether you're a fan of Deathmatch like I am, or could honestly care less about the game mode, I do think this is a smart direction for Blizzard to go in terms of content production for the time time being, but ultimately, like most of you, I do agree that I would much prefer to have some more substantial, more playable content for the time being. Unfortunately though, it seems like it's very unlikely we'll be getting any of that until Overwatch 2. But definitely let me know your thoughts on all this by dropping a comment down below. Are you a fan of Deathmatch like I am and you're excited to be able to play on a new Deathmatch map? Or do you just not care whatsoever and wish Blizzard would focus solely on Overwatch 2 and not even waste their time with Deathmatch in the meantime? Either way, be sure to subscribe, follow me on Twitter, hit up that bell icon, and come join my Discord server to hang out and never miss any of my future Overwatch content. Special thanks to my YouTube channel members who help make these videos possible, and if you'd like to join them to earn some cool rewards, then just hit that join button down below. Otherwise, this is Master Ian Gamer signing off, and until next time, have a great day.